Hello, and welcome to this week's podcast for LeaseDefend. My name is Art Veal. I am the founder of LeaseDefend, and these podcasts are my attempt to discuss some of the um, outside of the box thinking solutions that I've come up with, or some of the questions that I have, and to get your feedback because I don't know everything by far. I know very little. And some of the thoughts that I'm having on why we do certain things and how things are done, I'd like to address in this podcast and see if, as a group, we can come up with some better alternatives, I should say. So this first original podcast is going to be about why are you really doing this as far as property management, as far as investing in rental property. This blog is primarily for landlords that own rental property. It doesn't matter if you own one, it doesn't matter if you own 100, or if you're just thinking about buying rental property. I always try when I'm counseling with investors or when I'm working with an investor, I always try to get to the root of a problem because a lot of times if you don't address the root of the problem, then the problem manifests itself in a lot of other ways. It just comes out in different things. So one example of that is what we're talking about today. Why are you really doing real estate investing, rental, specifically rental property real estate investing? I deal with a lot of landlords and I've talked to them over time and they've told me things like they get into rental property because it's a great way to make extra money. It's a great way to kind of put if they've got some money saved up, they want to park their money someplace and they can get a good return on their money. And a lot of things to that effect. Some of them say that they like working on property, and so that's a really is something that relaxes them, so they get a good chance to go in and clean up or fix up a property, and it's relaxing. And while all of those things are fine, I think when people say things like that, it gets away from the core reasoning as to why you actually get into this business. I mean, if you think about it, after all, there are a bajillion different ways to invest your money and still get a decent return, and they don't take nearly as much work as rental property. Because let's look at all the steps that are involved with rental property. You've got to find the property, make sure you get a good deal on the property, make sure you're in a good area, make sure the numbers make sense. Then you've got to find the tenant and make sure you've got a good tenant. You've got to maintain the property while the tenant's in the property and make sure that they're happy, make sure that they make their payments to you, make sure that you make your payments to the bank if necessary. And then there comes the complicated process of you and your tenant decide to end the relationship, and you have to make sure that they get out without destroying the property. You have to make sure that they've paid all the money up to the point that they're supposed to make their payments. And even after all of that, you have to make sure that you turn the profit and try to put someone else in. And those are a lot of steps that are involved for something that's supposed to be a kind of fallback investment. That's a lot of stuff involved. And in each one of those steps, something can go wrong. It's very easy to buy the wrong property in the wrong area, to find the wrong tenant, to not screen to screen the tenant improperly and get the wrong tenant, to put the tenant in and they destroy the property, to have to get the tenant out on an eviction and then have to pay extra money to get the eviction done while they're destroying the property, to finally get them out and get back possession of the property, and then to have to fix it up all over again just to start turning not even a profit, but recuperating some of the money that you spent out. So if you think about it, there are a million reasons why investment property can possibly not be successful. So I think when people are giving me all these answers about they like rental property because they can fix up property and because they like dealing with people, I really think that's kind of an excuse. I think that's more of them saying what they're really saying is, rental property, I got into it because I heard it was a lot of money into it. And when I sit down and look at it, no, it's not that profitable for me, but I'm stuck right now. I can't get rid of this property. So what am I going to do? So I'll tell myself that these are the reasons why I stay with rental property. I think a lot of people are probably unhappy with their rental property. in most cases. Now, if you've only got one or maybe two rentals, you might not fit this paradigm because of the fact that a lot of times when you only have one or two rentals, it's very easy to manage. It's very easy to try to stay on top of your tenants, to go visit them every weekend or something like that. But even with that, a lot of times you could put your money, the same amount of money, into the stock market, and you don't have to go visit it every weekend, and you don't have to hear its excuses. You don't have to listen to if it says it didn't, their job didn't pay this week or something like that or whatever. You don't have to do a lot of that stuff. So I think if we get down to the real root of the issue of why do we run rental property, a lot of times it's because you got into rental property thinking that you were going to turn a smooth and easy profit, and you realized after you were in the property that it was more difficult than you expected, and it probably just you don't see a way to easily get out without taking a hit, taking a loss, or maybe you just don't want to get out because you think there's still a chance you can turn it around. And so, that's where a lot of people, I think, come from with rental property, at least a lot of the landlords I've talked to. Now, if you got a different opinion and you've come to rental property for some completely other reason, then I'd love to hear it. You can put your comments in the section below, and we can always address them in another podcast. But I think the majority of landlords, especially, I come across a lot of landlords that inherit a property from their parents and they end up renting that property out, trying to make extra money. And I think, honestly, that is a horrible idea of why to get into rental property. Rental property is a business, and if you don't respect it as a business, then it's going to cost you time, sanity, money, and pretty much everything else if you don't run it right. Now, that's my opinion on why people get into rental property. What I'd like to offer is an alternative of how I got into rental property and my story of what I do in rental property now. I think it makes a lot more sense. And if you look at what I'm actually doing, the end result, I think you'll see that there's a lot more. I think I look at rental property the right way. So to go back a little bit, my story of rental property, I started investing in real estate when I was back fresh out of college. I literally graduated college in, I think, June. And then I bought my first rental property. I started looking for a rental property immediately. I bought my first rental property in December of that same year. And I was heavily looking for property all up through that time, from June when I came back from college and moved in with my parents to December. And I knew I wanted to work in real estate. I had a degree in finance, and at the time, I think it was 1999, the real estate market was growing. The market hadn't crashed yet. They were they were just at the beginning of giving out money to pretty much anybody that was breathing, because the markets were opening up. And so it was very easy to get into a rental property. They had the no income, no doc loans and everything. So it was very easy to get into rental property. And for a couple of years, I bought a 2-flat in the city of Chicago. And for a couple of years, I ran that 2-flat. I went through a couple of things, and I bought some other property along the way. And for a while, I told myself the same excuses of why I got into it that everybody else does. I said that, it was something that I wanted to do. I said that it was something that I enjoyed, working on the houses and that kind of thing. And I didn't see it as a problem. Like, I didn't see it that I couldn't get out of the property easily. I just saw it as something that would grow eventually into this, big portfolio of properties, and I would own a lot of stuff. And so that's what I did for a number of years. And I remember one day, I had gotten kind of past my honeymoon phase of investing in rental property. And one of my tenants came to me and they asked me if they could have a couple of dollars to buy a cigarette. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, here I am profiting off of this woman, and she's no better off than when she started here. She's still kind of just the whole demeanor, her whole demeanor and everything. Just I kind of felt in my spirit that I wasn't doing anything to help her improve her life. I was giving her a place to stay, but it wasn't really helping her. And so I started to look at alternative ways to still do rental property and still get into investment property. but to help people. And ultimately, after years and years of research, what I ended up coming up with was doing rent to own property. And I did rent to own property. I know a lot of people now hear about rent to own property and everything else. I was very specific in why I wanted to do rent to own property and what I expected to gain out of it. Rent to own property for me represented a way to buy a piece of property, put my tenant in. It solved most of my things that I didn't like about rental property. So the first thing that it solved was I could buy a piece of property and I didn't have to always fix it up to the top of the line. I could fix it up to where it was livable, and then a rent to own person I could put in the house, and then they would improve it and make it their own because they had a vested interest in that property. So they would do improvements above and beyond what I gave them. The other benefit is that once they put money into the house, they were now invested in that property. So now it actually hurt them to just walk away because they put money into fixing up that house with the anticipation of buying it. The other thing that it helped with is that I would actually help these families. I would help people actually buy the house. So they would have financing. That would help them get their financing in order, and they would eventually buy the house. And I would sell my house at a good price, top dollar. So instead of me renting it out for a while and the house getting worn down, and then when I do decide to sell the property, I have to negotiate with a bunch of investors or other people that might want to buy it, but they're not really sure. This would allow me to doing it rent to own would allow me to sell it to my tenant at the top dollar because they're not going to fight me on price. They're going to be happy that I'm helping them buy. They're going to get the place that they're comfortable with, that they've already anticipated owning, and they would get their house. I would get top dollar. So my end goal, which is what every investor's end goal should be with rental property, is to get a greater return out of my investment than I put in with the minimal amount of work. So I was eliminating having to do work and maintenance on the property. I was eliminating the questions about my sales price when it was time for me to sell the property. I was helping the tenant buy a house, which is a goodwill kind of feel good kind of thing because you're helping someone improve their lives. Then the other benefit was the way I set up my rent to own. Instead of doing security deposits, I got option deposits, which gave me a large amount of money up front. So while other landlords that I dealt with were renting out, let's say you had a $1,200 a month rental, they would rent it out and make about $2,400 in security deposit, which isn't really making the money. They get to hold $2,400 in security deposit. Me, on the other hand, would do a rent to own, and I would charge $1,200 a month for the rent to own, but I would tell them I wanted $5,000 non-refundable option deposit. That money goes toward the purchase price if you buy the house, but if you don't buy the house, then you lose that money. And when I first learned this technique from Charlie and Randy France, some investors that I followed for years, when I first learned it, I thought this is impossible. Nobody's going to give that kind of money to get into a rental. But when you set it up the right way with a rent to own and explain the benefits that they get, they're very happy to give that kind of money and then some. I've collected down non-refundable option deposits of over $30,000 on properties, and that was upfront. Not to mention I got paid when the person bought the house, and I made money on the monthly payment, and I didn't have to take care of maintenance. So I didn't have to, run behind the house every week. So when you look at those steps, selling a house rent to own really makes a lot of sense if you're true with your real goal of investing in rental property, which is to turn a profit, more profit with less work. Now, I know there are some of you that are probably saying, I don't think I want to do rent to own because I like to keep the properties and everything else. The people that say that, you're living the biggest story, I believe, of everybody. Because if you think about it, if you're really investing and being smart with investments, then you're going to sell that property and turn a profit. Take that profit. If you want to still do rental property, go buy another property and do the same thing and peel off a little bit of the cash for yourself. Because you can still always there will always be a deal to be found in real estate and rental property. It's just a matter of you putting together, making sure you're doing it the right way. Compare that to, you own a property for 20 years and you make a rental. Let's say everything goes well. You own a rental property for 20 years and the tenants pay every month. You have very little turnover and you get the security deposits and everything else. If you add up 20 years of rent profit and then you sell the property at a profit with not doing any work, if you add all of that up, but you subtract all the maintenance that you did on the property, you subtract the vacancies that you've had, you subtract the evictions that you might have had to do, and then compare that to buying one rent-to-own property and selling it to a tenant every 2 years, and then taking that profit and buying another or two rent-to-own properties, and then selling it to both tenants in 2 years, and then doing 4, you double up, or even you do 3, you keep some of the money. I guarantee you will make far more money from the rent-to-own properties than you do with the with just the rental property. So I think that's what people need to do. They need to be honest about why they are really doing this and think about if there's a better way. In my LeaseDefend products, I always talk about the best way to be a property manager and the products, the best way to run your rental property. And if you're honest with yourself, this is probably a better way than rental property. I've done this for years. I don't see how rental property could beat this. If you have a different opinion and you think that rental property does beat rent to own, or you think that you have a way that makes sense, I'd love to hear about it. We can talk about it on the podcast. I might even invite you on to do a podcast with me so we can discuss it so everyone can hear. But again, give me your opinions in the comments below. That's my take on why we are really doing this rental investment business, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. This has been the LeaseDefend blog, a podcast. I look forward to speaking with you. Can't wait to see your comments below, and I'll talk to you next time.